KC-12, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, this is speed 1. Left land, swim west, copy. Speed 1. Crossing 21. Crossing at 24 is
Hello and welcome to the Blue Skies podcast. I'm PR Ganapathy, your host.
Just 70, roger, report type southeast, Greenwich, for the midway, and view selected.
It's my great pleasure today to welcome to the program Group Captain Sunil Palkar. Group Captain Palkar was commissioned into the nav stream of the Indian Air Force in '66, and he flew AN-12s in 25 Squadron, took part in the 71 Ops, and then became a qualified navigation instructor, QNI, and was in 181 flight, which is a very interesting flight that did some very specific strategic tasks. And then later flew Caribous in the Northeast to various short advanced landing grounds, and had a very interesting experience in the service. He had 30 years of service before he superannuated in August '96. So we're going to have a fascinating conversation with him today about his experiences, particularly during the '71 war and performing various strategic tasks within the Air Force. But first things first, welcome to the program, sir. Thank you so much for speaking to the audience of the Blue Skies.
Oh, thank you very much.
So, sir, we start off in our interviews by we want to get to know our guests better. So I just love to hear where you grew up. What was your motivation to join the service? Did you have any family members? And what was your initial journey like, your training? I know you did flying training. You went solo on multiple aircraft. I think the L5, the HT2, Harvards. And then after that, because of the bulge, I think at your time you were moved to the navigation stream. But just love to hear what that journey was like. What got you into the service?
Sure, sure. Well, it's like this. To begin with, I finished my intermediate science from the Bombay University, then, as it was called, in the year 1963. And it was exactly after the 1 year of 62 war that the Defense Ministry was also trying to recruit more people in the three streams of the armed forces. So I did apply for that, and I got what you call for an interview at the Mysore Selection Board, and I was selected for the pilots course to join Coimbatore AFAC in the month of August 1963. And at the same time, I had got a call from the engineering college in Maharashtra to join in for the engineering stream. And that's what there was a bit doubt, and people at home were also rather confused. And then, obviously, since we didn't have anybody in the armed forces, they were of the opinion that I would think of continuing with the engineering and don't think too much of joining the Air Force. Surprisingly, this is a very point to remember. Surprisingly, my mother, being a very bold lady, she was the one who took initiative, and then she gave a couple of examples. Being in Mumbai, she says, so and so dies of an accident, heart attack, this, that. What's wrong with him? Let him join the armed forces. And it is Shivaji's mother who encouraged Shivaji to become a warrior. I wouldn't mind my son joining that. So that is how there was encouragement from my mother, and I joined the AFAC in August '63. Thereafter, as you have got some little data, I went on to the EFTU at Nagpur, did my solo on the L5.
What was that aircraft like to fly, sir? I've seen some pictures and it seems like a lot of
Beautiful. It
fun.
was very nice, very comfortable, very nice, very easy to fly, I would say.
Tail dragger, isn't it? Although it was a tailwheel aircraft, but still it
It's a
was easy
tailwheel
to.
aircraft, that's right. It's a tailwheel aircraft, and there's no swing on the aircraft. I mean, that is a point to note.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
No swing on the aircraft, and high wing aircraft, of course. So very easy to fly. I think generally high wing aircraft are much easy, stable also.
Right, right.
After I finished my solo and a couple of hours solo flying on L5, we moved to the Allahabad, where I was flying on the HT2. I did my solo on the HT2 also, and it so happened that when at the time of the final test, I had to repeat the final test. So again, there was a bit of doubt as to what has gone wrong, and the course would be very keen to know, oh friend, what happened? You're going on a retest and this that. I said, well, I didn't know myself. Anyway, we went for flying. I mean, rather, I went for flying, and it was with the other CFI then, Wing Commander R.A. Singh, who was a Canberra pilot and an instructor. So when I flew with him, at the end of the sortie, he told me, "Well, your sortie was very good, and I have no comments." And then I came to know it was a trophy check.
Oh, wow.
And that was the story. Anyway, I missed the trophy by a couple of points, maybe. I was number two there. So anyway, then after that, I went to Jodhpur, and it so happened that that was the largest course. The what happened was 92, 93 course was together, 94, 95. So I think that was between 94 and 93 course. We had about more than 300 odd pilots,
My God.
and the issue was Air Force could not cope up. To be very frank, it's not that I'm trying to beat my trumpet, but that's a fact. And it so happened that when I was in the A flight, that is the Harvard, there were about I think so 6 or 7 instructors, and the pupils were so many that I would get a sortie. Believe me, literally after 4 days. I mean, initial sortie if you give after 4 days, what could be the state of affairs? But with all that, I finished all my 4 solos on Harvard without any problem. And then one day I was wondering as to others have gone for a nav sortie, and I'm still at the finishing the solo stage. And I used to get a sortie once in a week or once in 4 days, 5 days. And then eventually I was taken for a general flying, and then the instructor said, "No, you can't fly the aircraft." I said, "So what's the problem?" And then, if you remember, in Jodhpur, there are 2 runways, 2-3 left and 2-3 right. The 2-3 right is a shorter runway, if I recollect. Okay. So when we used to approach on 2-3 right runway, the aircraft would get aligned with 2-3 left. Well, I was a bit raw, to be very frank, because I didn't have so much experience. What the instructor was doing, he was trying to skid the aircraft and then say, "Oh, you are landing up on the wrong runway." And that's how he made a story and put me for suspension board. And within 2 days, I was suspended. So that was the sad part, which is really gone very sad in a way.
Right,
Anyway,
right.
then I joined the nav stream, and I did pretty well in the nav stream. And eventually, I got commissioned in the year 1966 on the 29th of October from Air Force Station Yelahanka.
Yelahanka. Okay. What is the training like for how long does it take? What do they teach you during that nav course?
There also, I was, I mean, maybe it was a series of misfortune I was up to, I don't know. Because generally, a nav training doesn't take more than a year. It is 6 months of training in Jodhpur then, and it was remaining 6 months at either TTW or at TTW, meaning at Begumpet or Yelahanka. It so happened that we were during the 65 period, and the war broke out. So they utilized us for guard duties. So that's how the course got extended. Okay. And the counterpart pilots course also had the same thing. I think so, whatever the thing was, 94th course or 95th course. I don't remember that part. So our training got extended, and then eventually the two nav courses, that is the 34th nav course and 35th nav course, merged into one, and we got what you call commission on the same day at Begumpet on 29th of October 1966. That's it.
Got it, got it. So then you were posted to AN-12s?
Yeah, and then my first posting was AN-12, and it so happened that there were only two ranks of in the AN-12. There were very senior lots, the squadron leaders, and very senior flight lieutenants, and there was a big void, and we were all pilot officers with just 2 days of service. So there was a lot of uproar and all that, and after about spending 1.5 months there, we started doing our MCF. All of a sudden, the Air Force came with a brainwave. They said, "No, these guys have to be sent for some refresher course or some in-course training," and some issues like that. So eventually, we were sent for the conversion to the packet aircraft. So we went to the packet aircraft at PTS, did a conversion the packet for about say 14 months, and then we came back to AN-12s. And then the moment we came to AN-12s, the guys were our own squadron guys were looking for us. They were so helpful. I must say, they were so helpful that they said, "No, no, no, within a few days we'll start your flying training, and we'll make sure that you complete your training within about a month's time." So once you are put on the fast track, by the time the error cause realized to repost and this that it didn't take place. So eventually, it so happened that I got converted, I got categorized, and we were flying on the AN-12s since then. Okay.
Right, right. So just, I think you're the first person I'm interviewing who's actively operated on the AN-12. Um, what was the size of the crew like? I know it was a four-engine turboprop transport aircraft of Russian origin, but, what was it like, that aircraft?
Yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah, basically it comprises of the crew composition was a pilot, a co-pilot who was sitting at a higher level, and in between them was the seat for the engineer. So the flight engineer would be sitting between the pilot and the co-pilot. Then we come to the navigator, which was a step down, and in the nose there is that perspex, the glass shield.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Uh-huh. Right.
fantastic view! And
Ah,
I would say I would enjoy the landing and takeoff because you're just few feet above the ground, and at 300 kilometers when you're over the runway, it's an experience.
right, right.
And the flight engineer, sorry, the signaler was also at a lower level and behind the co-pilot seat. And then there was a tail gunner because if you recollect, the AN-12s had the tail gun. I think so. It was 20. It's a Russian gun, so it will be odd number. I think it was a 23 millimeter, two guns.
Okay,
So there
got
was
it.
a flight engineer who was trained as a gunner. So that was the crew composition, and then there would be a load master because it was a cargo aeroplane. So it was a complement of at least 6 to 7 or 8 guys on a flight.
Got it. Got it. Now, and you were communicating between each other on intercom. So each one had a headset, and then that's how you were talking to each other? Okay.
Yes,
And was your portion of the cockpit pressurized? Because I know it had a ramp that would open at the back. So I'm presuming the cargo compartment is unpressurized. And was your
yeah.
portion pressurized?
That's right. You're very right. You see, the AN-12 had a system wherein they would call it as cabina in the Russian language, or the cabin was pressurized, and the rear portion was unpressurized. That's where the thing was when you used to carry a maximum of say 94 troops. We were allowed to carry 94 troops in the what do you call it, compartment, cargo compartment. We had to restrict our flying to 11,000 feet because of the oxygen problem.
Oxygen level. Okay, got
So
it.
flying to Leh or anywhere else, the troop movement, those is a lot of troop movement which you see in my article which I mentioned about Bangladesh operation, etc. We used to fly 11,000 feet with 94 soldiers. So that is how the configuration was. And also something which is a bit unusual, which I must mention, is a typical Russian transport aeroplane those days was made in such a way that it could not fly without a navigator because there were certain controls which was only with the nav. So it was interesting, and he became a very important part of the crew.
Right. Oh, can you give me an example? So what sorts of controls are these?
Yeah, the thing is, to begin with, see, the cargo doors were operated by the nav, and there was also a override switch available with the gunner or the load master in the rear in case it got the nav could not function or something had went wrong. So the cargo doors operation was with the nav, and the drop which was done, it was basically a gravity drop, but then there was a bomb sight also with that. So all these controls were also with the nav.
Oh,
Okay.
got it. Okay. So you're lying in the Perspex nose. You're using a bomb sight to pick your landing area, and then you press the cargo door and release the cargo. Is that how it works?
Yes,
Fascinating.
yes. And then what had
Wow.
happened was the in case it was the aerial drop, then the cargo rather door the cargo compartment would be having four rails. Okay, and they were removable, detachable. So they would first fix up the four rails, which were basically carrying the conveyor belt, and on this would be the 9 tons of load, and they would be held in position with the help of what you call a static chain. It's a static chain connected to the electronic release unit, okay, EMRU, called EMRU. And that is how, in case of turbulence or in case of what you call, all of a sudden the aircraft going into the awkward attitude, the load would not just fly back. So there was the chain which was the lashing chain would be used. And before the drop, the sequence would be you open the cargo door first, you remove the last lashing, and by then the pilot would be in contact with the nav, and nav would uh, request the pilot and ensure that you have a positive 2 meters rate of descent or a nose down, so that the load inadvertently will not move out, it will move forward towards the front cabin, which is safe in any case.
Right,
And
right, right.
then using the bomb side and using what I call the drop button, the ember button, the green button, the commentary would go on, and then the nose would be pulled up, and that is the time the cargo would go out. That is how the whole operation would take about 6 to 7 seconds. That's it.
Wow, fascinating. It makes a lot of sense when you describe it like this. Wow. And so you did a lot of missions like that where you were doing aerial
Yeah,
capture.
yeah. And now
Which areas were you flying to?
it so happened that well, this is also another the fact. I'm telling you the fact. It so happened that I did rather very well in the AN-12s, and then every time my posting would come up, the CO would get it cancelled. Those days CO had a lot of say, in the squadron. So as a result, not being a Sardarji, not being a Punjabi, I stayed in Chandigarh for 8 years in one posting, okay, in 25 squadron. So I was doing rather very well. In fact, I was a cat holder, and I was a sort of a big name in the N12s those days. And we had very interesting sorties to going to Leh landing every day. Then those days the Siachen was not there, so there was a dropping zone which was overflying the Siachen and dropping at the foothills. That was at, I think so, Sasoma. Sasoma was a desert. And then you would have heard now people talking about Daulak Beg Oldie, where
Yes, of
the
course.
squadron leader CKS Raja landed the packet, and now, of course, we have bigger aeroplanes landing at DBO, which is just about 10 kilometers short of the Chip Chap Valley, Chip Chap River, the famous where the Chinese had come to. So we would do a drop there also. That was known as Chungtash. And there was another desert which was in between these two places, which was Sok Solo, which is of reference now because that is a place where it's very close to Galwan Valley, okay, which has come
Ah,
into a
okay.
very prime talk. And if you notice, if I remember now, seeing what you call the map showed, present map. I don't have right now access to any map. That there is a sort of a loop in the river. There's a river bend and there's a loop, and that loop comprised of a ground which was about maybe 700-800 meters in length. And on the left side of the what you call the ground is the tall hills, and on the right hand side is the river, and again hills. So that is the area we had to drop. So Sok Solo used to drop just 4 containers because there was no scope for dropping the entire 9 tons, because the AN-12 dropping speed used to be 450 kilometers, which would be about say 92 meters per second. So if you drop in one go, about 6 seconds of drop means you will consume 400, 500 meters if you have a pinpoint drop, which is not necessary that every time is going to be there. But there was a couple of sorties where we used to have full 9 tons load to be dropped at Soksalu, and then we used to have a bet between the pilot and the nav. He said, "Okay, even if one single parachute goes into the river, you pay beer bottle fine," and vice versa. Okay.
Right.
And I would enjoy that particular thing because that's a very challenging task, dropping entire 9,000 kgs into that small patch of 500 meters. So that was a very good experience. And then there was one more very interesting thing wherein what happened was weather used to be what I would say is bad or at times unpredictable flying over the Himalayas
Hmm.
going to Leh. So there used to be a practice of flying a weather recce sortie. That means the first sortie would be termed as a weather recce, which you would take off before the sunrise. You would take off before the sunrise at Chandigarh. And by the time you are flying over the hills at 7.7 kilometers, you would see the sun. And then the daylight would be there at Leh and all other dropping zones. So you would give a good brief on the RT through the HFRT, and then Chandigarh would receive the message whether okay the deserts are clear, whether there's a cloudy weather, or you could undertake the flight, etc., etc. So I was on this mission early morning, weather recce, and as I said, we would take off maybe at about 6:30 in the morning from Chandigarh, and at 7 o'clock or rather 7:30, I was over the dropping zone, which I just mentioned. Chungtash was the dropping zone, which was very close to the landing. No landing was possible then at Daulak by Goldie because it was only a trial landing which was done by packet and then called off. Okay, so we did a drop of 9 tons at Chungtash, and then I came back to the squadron and having my breakfast, and in walked my nav leader looking at me. So we used to, have good fun jokes between each other as a crew member and say, "Oh, this guy is looking for you. Something must have gone wrong." And then he says, Palkar, I'm sorry, you don't go for the second sortie, but you have to pack up your kit and you're going on an out session trip. I will tell you the details later on. Those used to be the tasks in those days.
Right.
So I went to my room. I was a bachelor, of course. Picked up my kit and then I was waiting. And then he sent somebody else to the mess saying that please hurry up, don't waste your time. You can have your early lunch and be ready. So I went to the dining hall for my early lunch because 12 o'clock mess wouldn't provide the lunch. I remember that it was around about 12ish or so. And in walked this again my nav leader, and he says, Palkar, I've never done this, but on your dining table, I cannot ask you to leave the table, but something is very, very serious and urgent. So I said, no problem, sir. I mean, it's a duty and we have to honor it. So he picked me up, I went with him. And then to my surprise, I found my CO sitting under the wing of this AN-12 on a chair because he was asked by the CNC to get this aircraft airborne as fast as possible. Why this happened, we came to know later on that there were four Pakistani frigates which were sailing across from Karachi to Chittagong. This was before the 71 war, of course.
Right, right, correct. The one
And
country.
those as Super Constellation used to do the maritime reconnaissance.
Right, correct. Uh-huh.
AN-12, because of the excellent weather radar it had, and which was used for map painting purposes also, it was a secondary role assigned for the maritime reconnaissance. So it so happened that I happened to do the maritime reconnaissance also then,
Wow.
and I
Okay.
was very well trained for that. So I was the so-called Bakara or the scapegoat. They said, no, Palkar has to go on the trip. And that is how the whole activity picked up. And eventually we got airborne by about, say, 1 o'clock, 1:30. And it was a rare sight to see that when we landed in Pune, I saw the entire four big shot branches lined up there, the AOC, the CNJO, the COO, and a technical officer, and all that. This never happened because the joke was those are when the angel used to land because of a huge cargo. They would ask questions, why have you come? What is the load? Who has brought you? And then they would start working at it. We used to waste time. But this was totally other way around. And then the ATC officer came. He says, "Sir, you don't have to go to the ATC. This is your clearance form. Your flight has been cleared. You can go to Bangalore." I said, "Oh my God, what has happened?" Then they told that this is what is the thing. You'll get your orders from the Navy Ops Room. It is called the Maritime Operations Room (MOR), which is handled by the Navy. So we took off around about 4 o'clock or so from Pune, landed up in Bangalore, and then it was about 8 o'clock in the night. And then on the RT, I'm getting a message that please contact the duty officer and he's got a message for you. So while refueling, the naval guy with the Air Force duty officer came and he gave me an envelope, and which was supposed to be the operational order, which they called as a Form Purple. So that was the thing that it said that what is the point of my search and then shadowing for these four naval frigates or naval ships which were sailing across in the international waters. Now, you know, the international waters is just 13 nautical miles. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Your territory is 13 nautical miles and they were sailing at 14 nautical miles. Well, a ship could sail even half a nautical mile. The accuracy is so good for them. The best part of it, their intelligence, I must say, was so good that that particular day, not a single super constellation was online. It was under
Mm.
maintenance.
Oh my
And they
goodness.
took this opportunity and then they were sailing 14 nautical miles from the Indian coast. And they just crossed the Goa coast and they were heading for Cochin. So that is the time the Air Force got panicky and then the AN-12 put on the task. And I happened to naturally be on board and we took off.
Right.
So the moment the aircraft was refueled and made ready at Bangalore in the night, the moment we were taxiing out at land-up point, the ATC says, so and so, there's a message for you. I said, yeah, go ahead. He says, no, the message from Navy says the read so and so coordinate for so and so coordinate. No, he's changed my entire plan also because
Wow.
then that is a lot of panic, then. So I said, oh my God, he said, it doesn't matter. We took off. It took about 25 minutes to reach the coast, Cochin coast. And we started doing our search there. And I found those, there were four, on my radar, I picked up four ships and they were in formation and they were sailing across. And of course, because they were warships, we were told that not to close in less than 7 nautical miles because otherwise they would let go.
Let go,
Okay.
right.
And nobody knew the gravity of the situation till then. So we kept that distance, and the moment we came close, the ship switched off all the lights, mind you. So that makes it more interesting, and you say, "Oh my God, we can't take a chance." And then we were shadowing the four naval ships, exercise time what we could as per our endurance. And we reached down south past Trivandrum. And that's the time then the Superconi came up on the line. He called up, and naturally, our navigator used to be handling the RT most of the time on AN-12. So when he called me up, I said, "Yeah, I'm at so and so place." He said, "No, I'm available there. I can take over. Now you tell me which place you want me to hand over." So we did that handing over, taking on the air. And then the thing was handed over to him. And then we returned and then came back to Bangalore. And by the time we landed in Bangalore, it was about 3:30 early morning.
Wow.
Now, you know, Bangalore is notorious for that mosquitoes because of Ulsur Lake. So when we were in the aircraft, and by the time we would get a transport to go back to the mess and all, it would take time. So we looked at each other, and then I suggested, sir, why not Scotland Dhawan, late Scotland Dhawan, called as D. He was the captain, and I said, sir, what we'll do, we'll go to Pune, and then we got good accommodation there, and there are no issues, and we are all fit for flying. I am available. Of course, it depends upon you all, because I had that say in the Scotland by then, so I could talk in these very clear terms. And then he said, yeah, Sunil, we'll go to Pune, I think. Forget about the mosquitoes, is a menace in Bangalore. We took off at about 4 o'clock and then landed in Pune around about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. And then we called it off and he said, okay, now it's 24 hours off. So that was what I'm trying to say is in the morning I'd taken off at 6 o'clock for
For
to
the
South.
weather recce. Ah.
Yeah, it was the northernmost point which I went to. And by midnight I was at the southernmost point with the Cape Comorin past Trivandrum, doing the maritime reconnaissance and then landed back in Pune. I'm sorry, in Pune, yeah, then. And then after a 24 hour rest, went back to Chandigarh. So that was one of the very interesting episodes I had on this.
Amazing. Which year was this?
Well, I don't remember very well. I don't have the access to the logbook, but I think so it was in
Ah,
70, year 70.
70.
Yeah,
Okay.
before the war.
Visual ship for the visual. Just 70, Roger, report time southeast, Greenwich, for Commencement, and you selected.
Lovely. And, so you were doing paradropping also? You were dropping
Yes, yes.
paratroopers?
And yeah, incidentally, we were doing para dropping also. And we were doing those days heavy vehicle drop incident because it was just introduced.
Wow. Okay. And by heavy vehicle, it doesn't mean tanks, it's
No,
trucks
no.
and
Heavy
things.
vehicle meant was jeeps and guns, which are heavy guns and things like that. Okay.
Okay.
So
Wow.
they used to have regular exercises wherein the AN-12 group would get involved either para drop or the heavy vehicle drop. So we would do that.
Hmm. Got it. Now, I'm looking at this photograph that you shared with me, which I will share with the audience, which is the instrument panel that you have in that Perspex canopy in the nose. What are the instruments that you have access to as a navigator in the aircraft? Was there a VOR? Was there an ILS? Was there an
No, no.
APD?
Unfortunately, AN-12 was very poorly equipped because whatever the negotiation took place between our air headquarters team and the Russians, we didn't ask for a VOR. I don't know why. So we had only two radio compasses, and we had a normal what you call G4B equivalent compass. The additional feature on this compass was because this aircraft was to fly in the polar regions. It had an astro compass also, by the way, which will be a bit news to the other guys. Meaning, what could happen is if you could have a periscopic section which was there and you could take what you call bearing on a celestial body, say a simple example like a sun, you could get a relative bearing. And then there was a small little computer which you could see on the left hand side in that photograph, where you would feed basically four things. That is, you could feed the longitude, you could feed the declination of the sun, you could feed the uh, uh, sidereal hour angle of the sun, okay, and your latitude. So with that, the computer would compute what could be the true direction of the sun. Okay, there is a computer. It would solve the pz spherical triangle primarily. So with that, what will happen is it will give you the what is your true heading, because from the true course and from the relative bearing, it will compute. There's a differential synchro there in the compass system, so it will work out what is the true heading. and that would be displayed on the panel which is showing on the left. So it has a selector. The compass system had a selector. Either you could fly on a DI, purely a DI, or you could fly on a magnetic compass, which most of the time flew as magnetic compass. And there was a position for the astro. So the astro meaning you could change to the astro and fly totally on astro as a in the gyro stabilized mode. That is what basically it was meant for. But rarely this worked because most of the time the system was not working. So that is the one. Then there was a big what do you call indicator, which is basically for radio compass one and two, and your code system, which was called as USHA. That was the base compass unit, the round big thing on in front. And then you had the altimeter, you had the ASI, you had the VSI, and some aircraft had a Doppler, so you had a Doppler also there.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it.
The interesting part is why the ASI and because in the Russian aircraft, the nav used to call off the speed on the takeoff and landings. Okay, to the
Okay.
pilot. It was an assistance. So that is how one more extra job we would say, and that is why I say he would rely more on the nav because then he would take off his eyes from his ASI during the takeoff route. And same thing happened while on the landing run.
Okay, got it. And so you would tune the radios for them, and then they would see the same. They would see the same display in the cockpit upstairs. Uh-huh.
And unfortunately, it so happened that the nav cabin had weather radar, as I told you, which could be used as a map painting radar. Excellent, very beautiful. I enjoyed this particular radar a lot because when you're flying over the clouds or when you're flying over the night, you could pick up towns, you could pick up bridges, you could pick up all the important features on the ground as if it was the daytime, and then you could fix up your position. And of course, if you tilt your aerial, you could get the weather also and could avoid the CV clouds and all that. Unfortunately, this unit was only in the nav cabin. The pilot didn't have even a repeater. So every time the pilot would rely on the nav and he said, okay, you go on to this heading or you go on to this heading and then avoid the clouds and all that. And if he had confidence in the nav, he would obviously carry on with that. And that was the commentary one always had. So that was the thing. And then it had an autopilot control also with the nav, wherein the pilot would transfer the autopilot with the nav, and then whatever little changes of heading would be there, he would do that so that pilot need not be disturbed. Primarily, that
Oh,
was the idea.
wow, fascinating. So you're controlling the autopilot down there. Amazing. And so, give me a sense for the lead up to 1971. Was what was the message that you were getting? What sort of how did your training and preparation change? And in the lead up to 71 war.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. It so happened that it was in the month of March, I think so, 71. 71 March. The 25th Squadron, which was primarily doing the troop movement, and 44th Squadron was doing the carpet bombing, also called the bombing part of it. So we were divided the roles from the very beginning in this format. So it so happened that we were sent to Agra with full squadron fleet. I think so we had about 11 or 12 aircraft then, and we landed at Agra early morning, and then we picked up these para brigade from Agra, and we were supposed to drop them at Dum Dum Airport, or so called the Kolkata Airport then, and they were basically the paratroopers, which was eventually to be changed into the lungis crossing the Bangladesh border. Then, of course, it was the East Pakistan border, and then help the Mukti Bahini, and then what you call train them.
Right,
So
right,
this
right.
preparation started somewhere in the month of March. Okay, wherein we uh, took off with 11 aeroplanes from Agra to Calcutta and flying at 11,000 feet because we had 94 troops in each aeroplane. And then we dropped them at Calcutta and then we returned. So that was the beginning of the preparation for 71.
And so, as you came closer, say September, October, was there any change in your routine of activities, sorts of things that you all were doing,
No, no, really nothing.
and
Really nothing.
preparation? And as navigators, were you given and identified targets in East Pakistan, or things like that?
Yeah, it so happened that, as I mentioned, 44 Squadron was entrusted with the job of bombing. So they were geared for that, and they would go to the range and they would do practice bombing. And the AN-12 25 Squadron had a secondary role of maritime reconnaissance, But then they also said that why not give them a bombing role? So I was one which, of course, with my CO, we went to Jamnagar range and we did one or two sorties. And that was a practice sortie. And of course, we came back. But never took part in the bombing thereafter.
Aha. Okay, got
Okay.
it.
So then we remained in the Scotland as per the normal duty and never realized anything. And there was an interesting part of it. It so happened that those days, as we closed into the December month, we used to have very often the PAD exercise. You're aware of what all this happened,
I'm not
particularly
actually. What is a PAD exercise?
passive air defense. Passive air
Passive air
defense.
defense. Okay, sir.
So, the siren would go and you would rush into the tent and then you would switch off the lights and you make sure that there's a blackout and things like that. You see? So, we were practicing all of that. So, this was going on for, I think, about 3 to 4 months.
Hmm. Trenches had been dug
Yeah,
and all
trenches
that.
have been dug. Right. So, it so happened that on the 3rd of December, round about 5 o'clock in the evening, we were sitting in our what you call rooms. We had single room then, of course. I was a flight lieutenant, and then we were having a cup of tea and then having fun and talking with each other. And then the siren went off. So and it was yelling red warning, meaning you have to rush. So we said, "अरे यार ये बहुत हो गया यार ये practice छोड़ो यार." This is what was the talk between each other.
Right.
And then within a moment, we saw the flight commander coming in overalls on a scooter, and he said, "Hey guys, what are you doing here? Come on, you have to go back to the squadron." This, so every day we heard this PAD. He says, "Rubbish! It's not a PAD. War is on. You didn't listen." Mrs. Gandhi already had a broadcast and a talk on the radio, and that is how someone switched on the radio, and they said, "Okay, Pathankot, Srinagar, Rambala, I mean, Halwara has been attacked by Pakistanis and all that." So that is how the 71 war began on the third evening. That's exactly what happened.
So tell us about some of the missions that you flew or what sorts of sorties that you flew during the war, sir.
Yeah, we were basically, as I said, we were involved with the troop movement and equipment movement, transport support purely. So the moment we went to the squadron, and there was naturally everyone was looking forward to it. It was an event had a huge crowd. We had, I think, so on about 35 pilots, about 18 navigators, and then gunners and engineers from the ranks, and there are a few officers in that branch. So literally almost 200, 250 people in the squadron, besides the ground crew, which was 500 odd guys. So it was a big mela and good fun. And then the guys would say, okay, this aircraft will be fitted with this aircraft has been made ready. And eventually at about 11 o'clock in the night, around about that time, I think we all took off and we were told to go to Nagpur because we kept vacated Chandigarh base as such.
Aha,
The
okay.
20th squadron was told to move out to Nagpur, and we landed at Nagpur around about past midnight. And then there was chaos there. Naturally, 12 aircrafts landing in Chennai, in Nagpur, how to handle them, space and whatever. Anyway, and that typical problem. We went to the mess. Mess could not cope up and all that with so many guys. Anyway, that was fun. We spent the night there, came back early morning to the aircraft, and then we were given the task of going to the eastern sector. So that's how we would operate generally in the eastern sector, moving troops as well as guns as well as ammunition between places in the eastern region for those 3 4 days. And then we moved on to Gorakhpur as a detachment, and then we operated from Gorakhpur.
Aha. So in the east, what are some of the places that you flew to, and did you fly on the eastern side of East Pakistan, so
Yeah,
Tripura and
certainly.
things like that?
Not East Pakistan, certainly not. But before the war, the AN-12 used to do a detachment at Jorhat. Now, it so happened that AN-12, as I told you, the requirement of a desert was at least 500 meters. And there is no desert which is 500 meters. So, obviously, Dakotas were the ideal for dropping. Caribous would be still super better. And in some places where Dakotas were not been able to land, Caribous would land. This is what my later on a tenure in Caribou helped me to know that region very well. But while in AN-12, we were operating over Mizoram and over Manipur region, wherein the border roads were in full swing, making the roads. So, a point of interest is every day we would take off with 9 tons load of nothing but diesel. Okay, diesel in the cans, 200 liter can. That is 9 tons of diesel we would drop twice a day, or maybe thrice a day, for the border road guys. So that was a detachment which was very interesting. And then we could drop a couple of drop sorties also at Lungle, which was at you can say Aijwal, next to Aijwal, okay, a few miles south of Aijwal. So that was there. And then the northern side, Nefa and into the hills, there was hardly any scope because AN-12 operation would be pretty difficult. So dropping in that region was out of question.
So, coming to the Tangail Paradrop, so if you can tell us about the lead up to that, what was the preparation, what was the thinking, and
Yeah, so it so happened that on the 11th morning, I think so it was 11th morning, the angels and the packets, they got lined up at the Dum Dum Airport tarmac. And we were briefed by then the task force commander was Wing Commander Sahani, was a veteran of the packets. He was commanding paratrooper school also, in fact. So he was the one who carried out the briefing. And I think so Dakotas operated from Kalaikunda, if I'm not mistaken. So they operate from a different base. And then we were about, I think so, 11 or 10 odd AN-12s carrying heavy equipment, as I said earlier, followed by the packets which had paratroopers. And there were about 20 or total aeroplanes. So we were the first to, I was the lead nav then, of course, we were the first one to look into the area. And very well, of course, they had total air superiority, so there was no question. But very exciting because going to enemy territory. Then we reached that desert there, and then we dropped the heavy equipment there. And
what altitude were you at, sir?
we were 1,000 feet above ground.
Wow, that low. Okay. Was there a fear of small arms fire or even
No, no,
anti-aircraft
nothing. We were a
guns
little
and things
scared,
like
but
that?
then obviously the Air Force had full air superiority, and in the region which we went, Tangail from the eastern side was that area was made sure that there was no small arms fire. And then later on, I know that there was a cap provided. I think Ghana was there. I don't know in the which aircraft was Nats. At least Bhojwani was there, of course. Nats from Kalaikunda. They were providing the cap at the time of drop. Okay, Tangai. So there was the fighters giving the cover, CAP.
Mm, right, right.
Okay. And then we dropped all this and then followed the Dakotas, which dropped the remaining paratroopers. So there was almost a brigade drop. Almost a tune of one brigade was dropped there. And as you read that, there was a so-called hang-up. What happens is the static cord, which is supposed to leave the aircraft, got stuck. It did not leave the aircraft. So one paratrooper got stuck. The only way is to cut the static cord with a long knife, which the guy in the aircraft is tuned to do that, the para instructor. He did that, and then, of course, the paratrooper eventually came out of the aircraft, and then parachute opened up, and he was absolutely safe. But that was an emergency. That's called a hang up.
Right, right. Got it.
So that was the thing. And then we returned to Dum Dum, and then after that we were told to go to Gorakhpur. And then after this war, it so happened the moment the war was over, our job was not over because then all that material equipment which was lying in the east had to be moved to the west. So then we started moving troops and equipment from eastern theater to the western theater. So we were doing that, and we got involved moving all those things. So first few days we flew for almost 30 hours, 36 hours non-stop. I
Wow.
remember a couple of times I said, why instead of going to the mess and then having food and then do all that, why not end well a huge aeroplane, just sleep in the cabina or sleep under the wing.
Right.
And that was a experience, good experience
Right.
in a way.
Individual maneuver on that before visualizing. Just need 70, like your report time southeast, connect for Commencement and yield selected.
So let's change gears to after the war. You moved to Caribous, you said, and did a lot of flying in the northeast. Is it?
Yeah, that so happened that I went for an instructor's course after the AN-12 period. And then before I would finish my tenure at Begumpet, I was earmarked for this 181 flight.
Yes, sir. Tell us about that, sir. S- seems like a very high tech, secretive
It is,
kind
it
of this
is.
thing. So
And
tell us
I
about
hope
that
now
unit and
I can open up. I hope so now because we are not supposed to talk about it. There was basically an Avro modified with the aerials, radome, the black aerial which will be under the belly, modified by the DRDO. and we had a I think so American or Italian equipment which was basically doing an errant job primarily. Okay, so we would take off from Delhi and then go to Halwara and then go close to the border, and then starting from Halwara, you can say Moga, go right up to Nalia, about 10 kilometers, precisely 10 kilometers from the border. And mind you, it was pretty tough because, as a nav, I would tell you, we didn't have GPS, those systems. We didn't have those days what you call satellite navigation. It was purely a simple navigation which you continue doing plotting and make sure that you don't drift onto the other side, because if you go less than 10 kilometers, you will get shot and you'll be in trouble.
Right.
And we had to
Ah,
maintain a RT silence. So we would be constantly in touch with the SU. We would be only with the SU, and the instruction was should something goes wrong, the SU would call you. Otherwise, we would just have a total RT silence. And we will be flying at this almost ceiling of the Avro aircraft at about 22, 23,000 feet for better reception range. And then we would fly down right up to south. I remember once we landed up in Jodhpur, where the A1 was Groupie Nair, very bold and very good officer. I remember him very well. Because the moment he says, "Sir, this is the task," he says, "No question. You tell me what do you want. You don't say what should be done and what is the difficulty. There's no difficulty. You tell me what do you want to do." So he said we have to fly 10 kilometers from the border, and it will be RT silence, and the SU has to monitor. He says, "Done. Nobody will trouble you. Don't worry." And there won't be any RT there. Such clear-cut instructions he also had. He was given instructions from air headquarters. We came under D-Int directorate, basically.
right. And Directorate of Intelligence. And what was this radome and this equipment doing? It was collecting.
Basically, so we had two what do you call stations in the cabin, Avro cabin, which was basically a frequency analyzer. Okay, and it would get the frequency of the ground emissions. Okay, that means suppose if you got a radar which is transmitting and searching for the target, you would get the radar frequency, you would get the radar RPM, you would get the radar, what you call the pulse width and all those technical details, wherein basically it's called the radar signature. You would get the signature on the radar. It was the oscilloscope.
Right.
So
Ah,
the systems operator was sitting inside the cabin and they would monitor all that.
hmm. Got it. Got it. And were you ever, did you ever have a warning from the SU that there
Yes,
was
that's a very
something traveling near?
interesting, Ghana. There's a very interesting thing. I'm glad that you broached this subject. It so happened that we went on a task and we were told, okay, you go to Nalia and you'll get the orders on landing. So we would pack up the kit and we are not supposed to allow house people, where are we going, what are we doing, and all that. I
Right.
would just tell my wife and the family that no, we are going on a trip and we'll return after 3 days or return after 2 days. That was the thing, that's it. And Delhi would get confused because while going, the flight when will be filed for, say, Delhi to Ambala. But on the return, we are coming from Jodhpur or Ahmedabad. So he says, what about the remaining part of the flight? There's no flight plan and all that. So it took a lot of time for Delhi to understand that what was the mission like. So later on, he stopped asking the questions. Anyways, we went on this trip. We were at Nalia, and next day we took off from Nalia, and we were flying exactly on a westerly heading 270. Took off from Nalia, about 10, 15 miles from the border, going straight up to short of Karachi, you can say, and then return back. Now I remember it was, I think so, a Friday, so called the Jummah, and it was a holiday for the Pakistanis. So it was a maintenance day for the SU guys, okay, and the missile unit. It was a Crotal missile with the fighter pilots were dead scared of, okay,
Right.
because Crotal has a very good rate of fire and probability of success. So it so happened that when we were flying on this particular leg, and I could see the cockpit bit thumping going on. So I heard that thumping and I was rather surprised. So I left my seat, went to the cabin thinking that these operators had a fist or a fight and that there's a banging going on there. So when I went to the cabin and I found out the guys were in jubilant mood, raised their hand. He says, "Sir, mil gaya, sir, mil gaya." I said, "What did you find?" He says, "Crotal ka frequency mil gaya."
Wow.
Oh my God! I said that's a big achievement. And then we are happy and all that. We did the task. Then he says, "Sir, please one request." I said, "Kya baat hai? Bolo." He said, "We can repeat this leg bit short once again because we can ascertain some more details." I said, "Okay, doesn't matter." So I briefed the pilot, and he said, "Okay, we go on this heading, we come back, and then we go on this heading and do this profile and all that." And then that's how we re-revised our flight plan, and then we carried on. Now, it so happened because of this particular activity, twice up and down, people across got suspicious that there is something fishy.
Hmm.
And flying 10 kilometers from that border, which is the Kutch border, is nothing but absolutely barren desert. You can't see anything. So it was pretty difficult, but we managed well. And eventually, we came back to Nalia, landed, and then everything was all right, thinking that everything was hunky dory. And next day, we were told that okay, we have to go back to Delhi, and then you will be told what to do. So we packed up our bags, kids. Next day morning, took off, went to Delhi, and then we were marched into the D-INT's office. And then I remember those days was then Air Commodore Call, who became the chief.
Okay. Uh-huh.
He was a D-INT then, and then he says, in a little humorous tone, it's or kuch. So we were wondering why is he saying or kuch kya ho raha hai? We looked at each other. He says, "No, sir, this was a routine thing. We got this frequency. We have given you the data." And I said, "Oh, छोड़ो यार, frequency को तो मिल गया, अच्छी बात है." We were talking Hindi half the time.
Right.
There was a pin drop silent. Then he says, "Arey, with those good selective abuses, which I won't repeat here." But then he says, "यार, हमारी तो पैंट उतर गई थी."
Ah,
We looked at each other. He says, "Because you are doing this sort of a thing over Nalia, the Pakistanis got two Mirages airborne. They were at your tail, fully armed.
wow.
And since they were behind us, we wouldn't know. And we got scared, who? The Air Force. So they summoned MiGs from Jamnagar from the ORP to get airborne and then be on the other side. So we have an Avro in between. There are Mirages on this side and there are MiGs this side. And they're in total active mode. And if something went wrong, they were told to engage each other.
Right.
So that was a scene, and the chief was obviously involved in that. So this we came to know only in that by the D in. He says, "Yeah, this is what has happened." So we say, "Yeah, and actually we didn't know about it." He says, "Thank God you maintained within your territory, so that was a good point." But we got scared. Naturally, we put everyone on alert, and this is what happened. So that was the thing. Anyway, so that was this part of the story, 181 flight. Then when I went to the east, Caribous, it was very fascinating.
You're the first person I've spoken to who's operated the Caribou. So just tell us a little bit about that aircraft. So it was a Canadian aircraft,
It's
two
a Canadian
engine.
aircraft. It's a high wing aircraft, and I would say, very closer to stall because the takeoff landing performance is phenomenal. You can land on a football field. Okay,
Right.
you could land on a football field, and amazing the aircraft when you do suppose a short takeoff. Can you guess what would be the takeoff speed at 45 knots? It would leave the ground.
Oh my goodness.
A
Wow.
Fiat car would be faster than this aircraft on takeoff.
Wow.
So that is how we bought these aeroplanes. And you would have heard of a very famous place, Walong. Walong is a place where the Chinese had come there. They had taken over Walong.
Hmm.
So Walong had a small strip which was about 800 meters, you can say 800 yards length. And it was only a dropping zone, and that also pretty difficult because there were all high hills, there's a valley, and Dakotas could not penetrate, but then they would do at times drop. So the only aircraft which would not only drop but land was Caribou.
Wow. Hmm.
And flying was so difficult that I was an nav basically. So we had a makeshift seat behind the pilots, and then watched the fun because the desert was not seen, or the landing strip could not be seen till the time you're on short finals because you're maneuvering all the times on the final run, avoiding this hill, avoiding this valley, this peak, and all that.
Uh-huh.
And then you would land there. Why I'm just mentioning this is the interesting part of it. On the takeoff, the pilot would take off at 45 knots, a short takeoff. Mind you, high wing aircraft Caribou doing a short takeoff at 45 knots, leave the ground, and then with just a little bit of 4 to 5 degrees of bank, not more, to the left, he would engage very slow, shallow turn because on the takeoff roll itself there was a hill in front,
Wow.
and you had to avoid the hill.
Mm.
So only way left was to turn left at the speed, which was very dangerous speed, 45 knots.
Yeah, because you.
The flaps down. You had a short takeoff with the flaps down also, and then slowly, with the nose down, build up the speed to about 70 knots or 74 knots, which was, I think, so the V2 or the safety safe single engine speed, because by then you'd be over the river.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then the moment you would reach that speed, then you'd say, "Oh Jesus," because you're out of the danger zone. That was the thing. Caribous, this is how they would operate.
Right. And what was the payload like? So how much could they carry?
Or they could carry 3 tons,
3 tons. Okay.
quite a bit for that area in a way.
Mm, lovely. Now, so flying in the Northeast, a lot of accidents happen because of turning down the wrong valley and getting trapped in a box canyon, low clouds, things like that. So navigation wise, it must have been a really demanding task for you.
Yeah, it is, as you rightly said, because it's a VFR. It's a VFR affair. Okay. So you would go from one hilltop to the other hilltop to the other valley and things like that. There's no question of, some of the things are not mapped also. So you would create your own map. And then you have to be very careful because eastern sector, what happens, the humidity is generally about 97, 98%. And with 31, 32 temperature, the cloud formation takes very fast. So that's where the met knowledge comes very handy over there.
Oh, okay.
And in the morning, you would say, "Oh, weather is fine." You go for a sortie, but after 2 hours, because the heating, the cloud would form, and you find that the clouds are touching the hilltops, and then you're stuck because you don't know which is the escape route because you're flying below the hill top heights, so you're below the safety altitude.
Right, right. Uh-huh.
So that is how the eastern sector became very dangerous to operate those days.
Yeah,
There
okay.
were a lot of accidents because of this. Because while going, it was okay. On the return, he's entered into a clouds, and obviously he's got lost because there's no reference thereafter, and nobody can do anything then.
Got it. Mhm.
Visual for visual. Just need 70, roger, report time southeast, connection for Commencement, and yield selected.
Now, so you also converted to the Boeing later in your career,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
it?
Then it so happened that after Caribous, then I went back to NAV school, did a tenure there. Then I went to uh, Bangalore, Yelahanka. And then it so happened that they had again what you call earmarked two tenures, two different tenures. One was either IL-76 or the Boeings. So then I was handpicked for the Boeing, and then I served the Air Headquarters Comms Squadron for 4 years. Got myself converted in the sense that we had to do pilots along with the pilots conversion with the Indian Airlines guys at Hyderabad.
At Hyderabad.
And then we were on to the Comms Squadron. That was also a different experience altogether.
So you flew a lot of VIPs, I'm presuming, that
Oh
time.
yes, yes, a lot of VIPs, and some VIPs were very interesting to fly. Some of them were, yes, it was a small story there. Also, every time there was a story because I remember we flew the late King of Jordan. Now his son is the king. Okay, so this King of Jordan was there on board, and incidentally, by the way, he was having the license to fly DC-10, and he was also a hunter pilot. So he was a very professional. And the duty, the SOP in a comms squadron was in a Boeing, the navigator would, during the course of a flight, visit the VIP cabin politely and then find out if everything is all right or if the VIP wants something specific. Because that was the duty, part of duty, and then NAV would generally do that part. So the moment I knocked at the door and entered the cabin, he was sitting along with his wife and a small baby. He had his second wife, and there was a baby there. I was astonished to see when I went to his cabin, he got up from his seat. Okay, I mean, it took some time for me to realize that because I'm talking to a a sovereign person, mind you. And he says, "Sir." He addressed me as "Sir" on top of it. And then he says, "No, are you all right, sir? Anything we can do for you?" He says, "I have only one desire. If you don't mind, I would just like to see the cockpit."
Cockpit.
I said, sure, why not, sir? No problem. Because they had briefed us that he might
Yeah,
do that.
correct. Uh-huh.
So I took him to the cockpit and he had a look. And then, of course, he came back. But a king getting up and then addressing you, sir, and then shaking hands, oh, was something which otherwise I wouldn't have dreamt in my life.
Very
Okay.
nice. I
That
believe,
was one.
as a former pilot, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi also used to regularly come into the cockpit and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Not so regularly, but once in a while. Yeah, once in a while. And then he was very sharp because he himself was a flight, so he had to be very careful with the handling of the aeroplane in case the APU was shut down earlier, or in case the changeover was not done properly, so the light would blink, or he used the speed brakes rather too harshly. There would be a judder and all that. So these things were always there. A very interesting tenure, of course. There.
And I'm sure the standards of the squadron were very, very high because of flying the
Very high, I must
VIPs
say.
and SOPs
Yes,
and
yes.
all that must be much tougher than the regular flying.
And then you would actually set aside the Takasi or the what you call the Air Force orders and this that because they would say 8 hours or 10 hours from bed to bed and no cockpit. But invariably, it happened that we were flying for about 20 hours with the VIP, and there's no question of you saying no and this because VIPs are known for being late by about 4 hours or 8 hours. So I remember we went on a trip to Colombo with him. Those days there was this Colombo issue was also a lot. And then we were told that we would take off at 8 o'clock. That 8 o'clock went to 12 o'clock. Then they provided us lunch on board. At 12 o'clock went to 2 o'clock. And eventually at 11 in the night we took off from there. So that was the schedule. It was totally off schedule. Very often it used to happen. But then we were trained for that, and naturally, the comms crew requirement was such that in the profession you had to be the best. Behavior-wise, you had to be the best. You would not take undue advantage of the VIPs whom you meet because naturally you were likely to interact with them. So all those things had to be followed there.
Got it. Wonderful, sir. So, this has been a lovely conversation. We've taken more than an hour of your time. I want to thank you for your service and also thank you for taking so much time and telling us about your experiences in such detail.
Yeah, I hope it serves of some purpose. And I had one desire that put everything on record. So, Rana, today is the one with this issue. We've been able to manage something. Thank you very much, Gana.
Thank you, sir.
Visual for visual. Just need 70, Roger, report time southeast, connection for Commencement and yield selected.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapati.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.